Today is February 8th, 2004, and this tape is one of a series of interviews for the Archives Committee of the North Fork Women for Women Fund. I am Carol Taylor, and Lisa Scott is on camera. Today we are talking with Jere Jacobs. Jere has been on the North Fork for more than 20 years. She grew up in New Jersey and has degrees from both NYU and Columbia University. Since the early 70s, Jere has been visitor, renter, and is now a permanent resident of Greenport, where she shares her home with her mother Peggy, 2 dogs and several cats, and a peacock named Basil. Jere is very active in our women's community and in the wider community of South Holt Town through Rotary, the North Fork UU Fellowship, and other organizations. Jere, what brought you to the North Fork?
Well, in the early 70s, my best friend Jane Chambers and her partner Beth Allen started coming out to an area in East Marion that they thought was really great. And they got in touch with me and my then partner Paula. And Paula and I rented a little shack that clung to the rocks over the Sound in East Marion. And it was owned by Edna Bennett and Pepper Wheeler, who are were two wonderful women. They're both sadly now gone. And so we came out and we rented the shack from them a couple of years running. In the meantime, Jane and Beth had bought a little garage in East Marion, and they renovated it as sort of a little summer home. Then over time, Jane, who was a playwright, decided to give up working for a living and just write. So she eventually ended up in Greenport full time. They sold the little garage in East Marion and moved into the village. So that was my introduction to the area. And I rented a couple of other places over the years. And then
Was this summertime renting or
Yes.
year-round summertime?
yeah, summer rentals. And then eventually, I'm going to be skipping back and forth in time a little bit. Jane became ill. She contracted brain cancer. And at that time, I was kind of between careers in New York, and I decided to take off some time and come out and spend most of my time with her. And it was shortly after that she died, very tragically, in 1983, in February, almost this time at the year, actually. And then I sort of regrouped and thought, what do I want to do with myself? At that time, I had been in television production. And I think it was Jane's passing that made me rethink, what's important in life, what are we doing? So I spent the next couple of years sort of trying to figure that out. And in 1985, my partner at that time, Ann West, and I decided, let's bag New York. Let's go to the North Fork. And we moved out here and took up residence full time.
Did Ann know about the North Fork, or did you introduce her to it?
No, she'd been out here,
She had?
yeah, a number of times, and of course she knew most of the women in our women's community here.
Uh-huh.
But and she was very eager to leave New York also. Just had been, she'd had enough.
So
that was in 1985.
So you pulled up stakes, both of you, and moved out here, and did you have any idea of what you wanted to do for work, or
Well,
were you...
my background, as I mentioned, was in television production and somewhat in theater, and none of those things were going to be anything interesting to the residents on the North Fork. So I had to start thinking.
Little did you know.
Yeah. So I had to start thinking of ways to make a living. Annie was also very involved in theater, as both of us were, and that's how we originally met. And she made her living as a waitress, so she could do that anywhere. And it took about a year of sort of poking around and thinking about it. The very first year I was here, I was managing an antique store, and of course I knew zero about antiques, so that was interesting. And then gradually I worked my way into thinking, well, what can I offer? What do I know how to do that people are going to want to buy? Because I needed to make a living. So I ended up in the house painting business. And I also used my MBA skills to do some bookkeeping work and income tax preparation and that sort of thing. And I'm very happy I did that. It's a nice way to stay physically active and meet wonderful people. So many of my painting clients have become friends. It's really a lot
Well,
of
yes,
fun.
I'm sure that's true. And your friends have become clients.
Yes.
in reverse.
That's true.
But you said that you wanted to do something that you knew how to do, that people wanted. Had you had experience in house painting at that point, or did you just decided to learn on the job? Or
I think like most of us, I had
we've painted here and there.
Yeah, I'm something of an autodidact, and my father was very handy, and he always taught me, if you want to have something done, learn how to do it yourself. Get a book and figure it out if it's something that is written down in a book, or just do it. And I grew up on a farm, so I was accustomed to physical work also.
I did not know that you grew up on a farm.
Yeah, my father's avocation was farming. He was a businessman, but he loved farming. So
Well, what kind of farming was it?
sheep farm
Sheep farm.
in New Jersey. Yeah.
Oh my.
So, you just learn how to manipulate stuff. And then gradually, of course, I started tapping into the old-time painters out here and getting their advice and that sort of thing. But it was an easy transition in a lot of ways.
You didn't have any difficulty with the quote-unquote old-time painters being a woman coming in and doing their
No,
work?
they thought it was very amusing.
Well, I'm sure that you're one of them now, and they
Yeah.
come to you for advice from time to time. The women's community was really quite active by the time you had moved out here. I believe that would be true, that there were plenty of them in the community.
Well, when I first started visiting, renting and coming here during the summer, there was a women's community, but it wasn't very large. There were maybe 30 women.
Really?
Yeah.
In '85, there were only...
No,
No,
early in the
early,
70s. In the 70s, and then of course now we have hundreds.
Yes.
So it's been a very interesting evolution, and most of the women who are in our community now are either homeowners or part-time homeowners or renters, or they're not just day trippers and stuff. They really are very committed to the area.
Right. You speak about the evolution of the community. What changes in a broad sense have you seen, and then in a more narrow sense also?
The interesting thing I think about our women's community on the North Fork is that over time it has coalesced into a really something you would call a community. Very strong sense of community, a sense of bonding. And one of the things that started that was my friend Jane Chambers' illness.
How so?
Well, she was diagnosed in 1981, and she was in New York at the time. And I remember the night that we went to the emergency room at Lenox Hill, she and Beth and I, with a terrible sinking feeling that this was not a good thing. And she was told then that she had a very rare brain tumor. And so she was in Lenox Hill for an extended period of time while she underwent surgery, which didn't really do much, and some other procedures. And we were concerned at that time, now mind you, I'm still talking about New York City, we were concerned at that time about the number of medical personnel that come into a hospital room with information, opinions, questions, all that sort of thing, for a person who is already really in a panic. And so Beth and I decided we really had to have, Beth was Jane's partner, as I think I mentioned, that we really wanted very much to see to it that Jane was not going to be alone in the room. So we started calling people we knew, women we knew. And because Jane was a lesbian playwright of some renown, the word began to get out, and we were getting calls from people we had no idea existed, who wanted to come and do 8 hours with her, or 4 hours, or whatever it was. So the whole time she was in Lenox Hill, She was never alone.
Oh, wonderful.
And there was a continuing log that we all kept so that we could, have a sense of what was going on. Then we brought Jane out to Greenport, to her home. And the same thing happened here. Women began to show up at the door, and they said, what can I do? And they'd bring food, or they'd sit with her, or they'd help with therapy, or they did any number of things. And again, it was everyone pitching in. Everyone was a regular. Everybody had a certain time when they arrived, and what they were going to do was very clear, and all this sort of thing. And I must say that the women who were the first to arrive at Jane and Beth's house were the women who ultimately founded NFWF.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Those were the seeds.
Jan Swanson, Marianne Weil, Lucy Goodman, on and on and on. All these women who later founded this wonderful organization were the ones who showed up first. And it's that to me was the beginning of a real coherent community, of a sense of belonging and a sense of sisterhood and a sense of sharing. And to me, it's very unusual. It's unique.
It was a lot more than talk. It was people going there, putting themselves there.
Yeah. But it was a fascinating genesis. It really was. It was just kind of staggering. And when it was over, when Jane's life was over, it didn't go away. People kept that sense of community, and of course it was some years later that NFWF was organized.
The North Fork Women for Women Fund.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But that was the beginning of it. Now I'll go one layer further, going backwards in time a little bit. In 1980, Jane Chambers' play Last Summer at Bluefish Cove was first produced in New York. And Bluefish Cove was a play that she had written, obviously, earlier, about a woman in a community very like ours on the North Fork who contracts terminal cancer.
This was before she knew she was ill?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
5 years before she
Oh,
knew
my.
she was ill. And who is cared for by her community of women. And it's one of those very strange instances of life following art. And it's very eerie, actually,
Yes.
to
Yeah.
to
Be careful
watch
what you
all
write
that.
about.
Yeah, really.
Well, they said, Hillary says it takes a village, and we clearly are a village.
We're
We have
our own little
created it.
village,
Yes.
yeah. Anyway, that's, to go back to your question, which is what, what happened to make this community so strong. I do think that was the beginning of it,
Mhm.
and that
Mhm.
it grows from there, it widens from there. We become socially involved with one another. We organize other events and organizations like the Narrow River Singers and so forth. And it keeps the community together, but not insular, not ghettoized, I don't feel. I really feel that most of us are very involved in the larger community as well.
You are now serving your second term on the board of directors of NFWF as treasurer.
Yes.
And that certainly taps into your experience, as one of your degrees was in business administration.
Right.
Taps into your experience. You're doing other things out here that involve those skills also, with other organizations besides
Yeah.
the North Fork Women for Women Fund.
Yes, actually, one of the reasons that Annie and I moved out here in 1985 was that I was already a member, even though I lived in Manhattan, I was already a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church in South Hope. And I felt like I belonged to that community as well. That is what I talk about when I say the larger community. That church ultimately split into two, and a group of us moved off and created another fellowship, another UU fellowship. But the two churches are beginning to work together again.
That's good.
And I served as church accountant, which basically translates to treasurer for both organizations. And I also belonged to South Hope Rotary,
Yes, I know.
which is another way I feel a nice involvement with the larger community. And I also feel that when people like me and like you and like Lisa exist in both parts of the community, in the women's community and the larger community, that we do a lot to make those two come together in a quiet, peaceful way, so that there's not a lot of confrontation and not a lot of suspicion, but we just get absorbed into the larger community.
Well, this brings a question to mind. Have you always been quote unquote out?
I've been very, very fortunate because I spent a lot of time in theater. That was my first love in New York.
Yes, we're going to get to that soon.
Okay. And obviously in theater, if you're not gay, there's something wrong with you. And most of my career was spent, my business career, was spent in television production, where it was also preferable to be gay because you were more fun. And so I've never had a
That
problem.
almost goes without saying, Jere.
I've never had a job where I felt I had to be in the closet. I could always be just me, you know, and it was fine. I'm very blessed that way, and
Yes.
it's unusual,
Yeah.
or has been at least, in, you know, the past.
Well, now what I would really like for you to expound on is the big love in your life, the theater, and it's been something that you've been involved in for many, many years and are still very active in.
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Okay, the ties keep going back and back and back. Of course, when I majored in theater arts at NYU, and the year that I graduated was the year I met Jane, who became my best friend instantly. She, of course, was very involved in theater. She had dabbled in acting, some directing, and was thinking about writing at that time. Ann West, the partner I had when we moved out here, was also very involved in theater and in feminist theater, so I met her very early on in my career after college, although we didn't become partners until 1985. I should interject that Ann died tragically in 1989 as a result of an automobile accident.
Yes.
And so, unfortunately, her time on the North Fork was very limited. But when I began working in theater, when I got finished with school, with the first phase of school, and went out there to knock everybody dead, I worked in a bunch of small companies here and there, and we, toured with Shakespeare for students in schools in the tri-state area and stuff like that. And then I think it's now about 35 years ago, I met a wonderful director named Eve Adamson, and I worked with her. She was the owner of a little theater on 13th Street called the Mainstream Theater. And she said, why don't we put together a repertory company and do classics and new plays and wonderful work? And I said, sure. So there were about 4 of us who got together, and we founded a company called the Jean Cocteau Repertory, which still exists at the Bowery Lane
Really?
Theater. Yeah. And sometimes the alumni get to go for nothing to big parties.
Well, that's the least they can do for you.
So
Founders.
So I worked and we did wonderful work. When we first started the theater, it was around the corner in a little building that had been a storefront. And we had no money at all. We made lights out of coffee tins painted black and home-style dimmers in the back room. And it was incredible. And we did some wonderful, wonderful theater there. And then some years later, we were able to move it over to the Bowery Lane, which is where it's been ever since. With
Now, you
Wilkins.
were acting there, or?
Yes.
And
Yes.
putting on, you were doing everything probably, acting and
Well, in a
producing.
rep company, yeah, you do
Putting it all
everything.
together,
And,
yeah.
on Tuesday, you're going to be playing the lead, and on Wednesday, you're carrying a spear, and on Thursday, you're the house manager, and the rest of the time,
Yeah.
you're in rehearsal and building sets. Because we had 5 shows in rotating repertory.
Oh, my.
So we were always in rehearsal for the next show that was going to open. It was the most exciting theater I can imagine. It was so much fun. And occasionally Eve and I still get together, and I was invited back a few years ago to do a 2-character play as a guest artist there, which was a lot of fun.
And you did it?
I did it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It was wonderful. A wonderful play by Edvard Radzinski. And so I've always loved theater, and I've always had to do it. But I also had to make a living, because I never really made a living at theater. So I was always doing two things. I had a job and I had theater, and I had a job and I had theater. And there was a period of time when I was doing television production where it was very difficult to do theater, because in television production we were on the road all the time. And that was one reason I stopped the production work, is that I found not only did I not have a life, I couldn't have a relationship that made any sense, I couldn't have a pet.
Yes.
But worse than that, I couldn't do I couldn't commit myself to theater. I had to leave the rep company. And I thought, well, this is no fun, you know, making a living.
That's what you really wanted to do.
Yeah.
You really wanted to do the theater.
Yeah, yeah.
And what you like about it most is the acting, rather than the...
Yeah, I do. I mean, now, the last few years, I've done some directing, which I enjoy, but I like the acting the best.
You directed one of Nancy Dean's plays, didn't you?
I've directed a few of Nancy's
Oh,
plays.
really?
Yeah. We did an off-Broadway production, I think it's 3 years ago now, of one of her plays. And we had done 2 off-Broadway productions.
I think I went to see one of
Other
them.
ones, yeah.
I don't recall the name of it now.
Upstairs in the afternoon.
That's the
was
one.
of them.
That's the one. I did
Yeah.
see that, yeah.
Yeah. Nancy's a dream to work with. She's just an angel. We enjoyed that process enormously.
Well, now you also have done recent one-woman show, have you not?
Yeah, the one-woman show, which is the poetry and prose of Edna St. Vincent Millay, is a show I put together, let's see, it was in, I guess, the late 70s when I first started compiling the material and putting it together. And occasionally I'll get bookings for it here and there, and it's a lot of fun to do. And I did it about 1.5 years ago as a benefit
Yes.
for NFWFWF.
Yes, I remember that.
Dusted
Yeah.
it off and did it again.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about that show is that there's so much material that it changes every time I do it, because I keep wanting to try to put some new things in.
Well, I can't help but wonder how you could remember it all, and it's just,
I can't.
oh,
I
mercy.
carry the script.
Oh, well,
I'm carrying the script in my hand. And so
oh, I
often
guess
people will
that's
say,
right, I've forgotten that.
how do you remember all that? And I'm right there in front of them. I really have most of it memorized. Once I
Yeah.
get started on
Yeah.
a piece, then it just flows. But
Yeah.
because I change the material all the time, I have to have some kind of crib sheet there. But another reason I carry the script, and I did that intentionally early on, is that I want people to remember who they're hearing, whose voice they're hearing.
Ah,
That
yes.
it's not the
Yes.
actress portraying a character, it is this wonderful woman.
But Jerry, you are, without a doubt, in my mind, one of the very busiest people I know anywhere, but out here especially, with your oar in every little body of water, paddling yourself around. There's one character that you haven't mentioned that I think we probably should introduce before we close. I mean, you're a real dynamo, and we're very, very lucky to have you in our community. I take that quite as a personal, real plus to have you as my friend.
Thank you,
And have you as one of the basement babes in the Narrow River Singers.
This is one of the other basement babes,
Well,
and one's behind the camera.
Well, I guess we're all basement babes, but you're sort of the sub-basement. The second altos.
Bedrock babes.
Right. And one more character that we haven't touched on yet.
Well, my name is Edith Ann.
Oh, Edith Ann,
Yes, and I think it's very upsetting that no one has mentioned my appearances at the talent night performances.
Oh.
And I also want to say that this woman you've been talking to has told you nothing but a pack of lies. The end.
The end. Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you, Carol.